When I was 14, I was part of the school's cadets program, which meant training in discipline and basic military style activities. Every so often, we attend a week-long camp at a real armed forces base to get a more authentic experience. We stayed in dorm-style accommodation similar to student housing. Boys were on the ground floor, girls on the first floor. There were 4 of us sharing a room. It was only the second night of camp. I remember plugging my phone in on the floor since there were no bedside tables, then falling asleep. At some point during the night, I half woke to one of the girls mumbling, "RAF camp." I didn't think much of it and drifted back to sleep. Then I woke up again. This time there was a man sitting on the end of my bed. He was just staring into the middle of the room, completely silent. It took a few seconds for my brain to catch up, but when it did, I screamed and demanded to know what he was doing there. I knew immediately he wasn't part of our group, and men weren't even allowed on our floor. One of the other girls woke up from my yelling and didn't hesitate. She grabbed him, walked him out of our room, down the stairs, and outside. He didn't resist. He didn't even say a word. We told a staff member right away, but none of us could understand how he had even gotten inside. The building was secured with a code that only campers were supposed to know. A few days later, while we were lined up outside the accommodation, I glanced at a nearby building and saw him again, standing at a window, watching us. I told staff immediately. That's when he was identified and a formal investigation started. Later we learned that before entering our room, he had gone into a boys' room downstairs and asked where the girls were staying. Someone told him. From there, he went up to the first floor. We still don't know how many rooms he entered or why. The girl who muttered RAF camp in her sleep had no memory of saying it. Whatever his intentions were, we'll never know, but after that night, I barely slept for the rest of the week. Story 2. Fair warning, this is a slow burn story, but even 5 years later, it still gives me chills about how differently it could have ended. Back in 2019, my partner and I were on a 5-week road trip across British Columbia, Canada. We rented a car in Vancouver and looped through Banff, Jasper, and Whistler, mostly sleeping in national park campgrounds and roadside rest stops. One evening, while driving along the Crown's Nest Highway between Paulson and Castlegar, we pulled into a quiet provincial park campground to spend the night. It was right by a lake, peaceful, remote, and far from any towns. A few other campers were already there with motorhomes and caravans. We were the only ones with a tent. We arrived before dark, set up camp, and exchanged polite hellos. One man in particular stood out, an older guy, probably late 60s, staying in a motorhome. He was friendly, but too friendly. He kept lingering and chatting longer than felt normal. He noticed we had a mocha pot and told us he had a massive bag of coffee beans in his motorhome if we wanted some. Then immediately mentioned he didn't even drink coffee. He kept insisting we come to his motorhome to get him. We politely declined, feeling a bit weird about it. Eventually he wandered off toward the lake. My partner and I exchanged looks. Neither of us felt comfortable, but we tried to brush it off. Later, while cooking dinner in the communal shelter, he came back. We avoided eye contact, but he spotted us and joined us anyway, talking while we ate. He started asking personal questions about our relationship, whether we were married, if we lived together, if we had or wanted kids. Nothing outright alarming, but something about it felt invasive. Then he asked if we drank Coca-Cola. He said he had plenty in his motorhome, again, mentioning he didn't drink it himself, and once more insisted we come over to get some. We declined, again. At that point, we were both visibly uneasy. We finished dinner quickly, packed up, and headed back to our tent. On his way back to his motorhome, he stopped again, inviting us to come to watch TV or grab drinks. We declined for the 3rd time. As it got darker, we decided to take a quick walk down to the lake to brush our teeth and throw trash away. Near the bins, we noticed a huge shadow leading inside one of them. When it noticed us, it dropped to all fours and bolted toward the tree line. It was unmistakable, a mountain lion. Frozen for a second, we watched it disappear. Once the shock wore off, we fast walked back to our car and decided there was no way we were sleeping in that tent tonight. Between the mountain lion and that unsettling camper, something felt off. We locked the doors, reclined the seats, and slept in the car until morning. At dawn, we packed up quickly and left without seeing either the man or the animal again. As we drove away, we debated whether we misjudged the old guy. Maybe he was just lonely or harmless. Later that day, my brother called to check on us. He'd seen the news reports about an active manhunt in British Columbia after multiple killings earlier that week. The suspects didn't resemble the camper, but it was enough to make us question everything. To this day, we don't know if we overreacted or if trusting our instincts saved us from something far worse. Sometimes your gut knows before you do. Story 3. This happened about 4 summers ago when I was 24. I'm a female and I was spending a weekend camping with 2 close guy friends. I'll call them Tom and Rob. That first evening was normal and fun. We were grilling, drinking, sitting around the fire. Another guy around our age showed up on a motorcycle and set up a tent at the site across from ours. I didn't think much of it. Camping alone isn't unusual, and I've done it myself. Since we're pretty social, we introduced ourselves and offered him a beer. I call him Josh. We hung out for a bit, talked, had a few drinks, and shared some smoke. He seemed a little odd, but nothing alarming. He mentioned his wife several times, which made me feel like there was nothing weird going on. Eventually, we all went our separate ways for the night. The next morning, we went into town to grab some groceries. The campground wasn't super remote. When we got back, we chatted briefly with Josh again, then started getting ready for a hike to a gorge and some waterfalls nearby. I was wearing jeans and wanted to change into some workout clothes. I made it very clear I was going into the tent to change, while Tom and Rob were outside grabbing gear from the truck. As I was inside the tent mid-change, I suddenly heard the zipper open. I turned around, half undressed, and Josh was standing there, staring at me. I yelped in shock, and he immediately ran off. When I finished changing, I came out and told Tom and Rob what had happened. They were furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene. We went on a hike anyway, staying gone for several hours. When we returned, Josh was gone. His motorcycle, his tent, everything. He never came back. Story 4. This happened about 15 years ago. A group of friends and I went fishing and camping at a remote lake, about 2 hours from home, accessible only by a 4x4 trail. There were 4 of us, grown men, and I was the smallest at around 195 pounds, which matters later. The campsite itself wasn't great. It sat on the side of a steep hill with barely enough room for our tents and a small fire ring. You had to hike down a narrow, winding trail about 100 yards from where you parked to even reach it. But the fishing made it worth it. The lake had a deep spot packed with trout. We spent the day drinking beer and catching our limits, then lit a small fire after dark and just talked and laughed like you do on good camping trips. Out of nowhere, a blinding light hit us in the face from about 10 to 20 yards away. We hadn't heard anyone approach at all. A voice announced, "Sheriff." One of my friends asked, "Are you with the Our County Sheriff's Department?" No answer. Instead, the man shined the light directly into each of our faces, one by one, and said, "Have a good night," and walked off. We just sat there, stunned, asking each other what the hell just happened. After a minute or two, curiosity got the better of me. I turned on my ridiculously powerful flashlight and aimed up the trail. The guy was about 50 or 60 yards away, just before a bend where the trail dipped out of sight. That's when we all saw him clearly. He was just a guy in a flannel shirt and jeans. I said out loud, "That is not a sheriff." He must have heard me because he suddenly started moving faster and disappeared around the bend. A few moments later, we heard an engine start, then nothing. The strange part was that none of us remembered hearing a vehicle earlier, but we chalked that up to drinking and being loud. What still makes this unsettling is the thought of who else he might have approached. If it hadn't been 4 large men sitting around a fire, if it had been a couple or a solo camper, what was he planning to do? We debated whether we should have chased after him. Probably not. But we absolutely should have reported it to the real sheriff's department. Unfortunately, we never did. Story 5. I've never looked at the woods the same after that night. I used to be a woods guy. I camped alone all the time and felt completely at home out there. One trip I decided to bring my wife with me. We were hiking deep along the edge of the mountains with a wide river running for miles beside us. As night approached, we set up our tent and built a fire. We sat close together, listening to the water and the wind, until the sky turned gray and rain began to fall. Eventually, we crawled into the tent to sleep. I couldn't rest. My wife, on the other hand, was out cold. She's always been a heavy sleeper, and I think she felt safe knowing I was there. At some point, I quietly unzipped the bottom of the tent and looked outside. There was no moon that night, but the stars were visible. All I could see at first were the trees and a small grassy clearing beyond them. Everything felt normal, until it wasn't. Something emerged from the woods. It was dragging a deer. The animal's insides were hanging out, its body limp as it was pulled across the ground. The thing dragging it was tall, skinny, and covered in hair. Its arms were long, its claws swinging near its waist as it moved. It looked like a wolf, but walking upright like what people described as a dog man. Its mouth hung open, exposing rows of sharp teeth. It dropped the deer and began to feed. I could hear it growling, low, unnatural sounds as it tore flesh away and ate. Then without stopping, it lifted its head. Its eyes were glowing green. It saw me. Without moving its eyes, it stared straight at me while continuing to eat. Then slowly it stepped backward and faded into the darkness of the trees. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stayed frozen in fear for the rest of the night, wondering if it would come back. It never did. When the morning finally came, I rushed us out of there. My wife knew something was wrong. I barely spoke, but I never told her what I saw, and I never will. What haunts me the most is this. I had been seconds away from stepping outside the tent when I saw it. I can't stop wondering how things would have gone if it had seen me out there. Or worse, if it had come back while I was only a few feet away from my wife. I will never camp again. Not now that I know what's really out there in the woods. Story 6. Hey y'all, this happened in the summer of 2022, and I honestly think about it sometimes because of how unreal it was. I never wrote it down before because I was genuinely in shock afterward, but yeah, here we go. Every summer where I live, me and my friends like to make small campfires in secluded spots around the city. Nothing crazy, just chill little hangs. We don't want to drive an hour to a campsite or pay fees, and these plans usually happen last minute anyway. There's one spot really close to my house by a river. That's perfect because almost nobody goes there. The only real concern is wildlife. I live in the Pacific Northwest, right by forests and mountains, so bears are very much a thing. One night around 11 p.m., I decided to head there before my friends so I could set everything up early. The walk to the spot starts with about a 2-minute paved path, then a small trail that slopes down near a bridge crossing over the river. There are 2 lamps along the walkway, one halfway down and one near the bridge. I parked my car near the start of the trail and grabbed my stuff, a flashlight, lighter, firewood, and a small shovel to dig the fire pit. When I got down to the spot, it was basically a sandy little beach area next to the river. During the day, families bring their kids there to wade in the water. I set my chair down and started digging the pit, using only my flashlight to see. I was shoveling sand right next to me, nowhere near the water, when suddenly I heard a huge splash, like loud enough that it sounded like a big rock being thrown into the river. That immediately confused me because I knew I wasn't throwing sand into the water. I shined my flashlight at the river but didn't see anything. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. Then it happened again, another loud splash. At this point, my heart rate was up because logically, something had to be falling into the water. I pointed my flashlight up toward the trees above the river, thinking maybe something dropped, but I didn't see anything big enough to cause that noise. As I kept digging, already uneasy, I heard rustling near the arch of the bridge. I froze and shined my flashlight in that direction and called out, "Hello?" No response. Now I'm thinking, if this is a bear, I need to leave immediately, but I didn't see a bear. No movement, no sound, so I tried to convince myself I was just scaring myself because it was late and dark. Then I heard the rustling again, very clearly leaves moving. I shined my flashlight back over and that's when I saw it. The naked back of a man? He was hunched over facing away from me. From what I could tell, he looked maybe mid-40s, shaved head but not bald, medium build, kind of a mix between chubby and built. I completely froze. As my flashlight stayed on him, he started to stand up, and that's when I realized he wasn't wearing pants either. Nothing, fully naked. My brain immediately went into survival mode. I packed my stuff as fast as possible, convinced that he'd been throwing things into the water to scare me. I grabbed everything and speed walked up the ramp toward the paved path, constantly looking back. I was wearing Crocs, which made the situation feel 10 times worse. I reached the halfway point of the path and started to feel a tiny bit of relief. I thought I was safe. Then I looked back. The man was crawling up on the ramp on all fours like an animal. His head was tilted up, staring directly at me. When he reached the path, he slowly stood up, faced me, and then started running toward me. I ran. I dropped my flashlight and didn't even care. I sprinted as hard as I could toward my car. I looked back once, and he was still running at me, still completely naked. I reached my car, fumbled with my keys like a literal horror movie, dropped them, picked them up, unlocked the door, then threw my stuff into the back seat and jumped in. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. As I started to the car, I kept staring at the path, waiting to see him appear again. Then I drove off as fast as I could. About 30 seconds later, my friends called asking if I made it to the spot. All I said was, "Guys, I have a crazy story." They came up to my house and I told them everything. None of them were involved, obviously. As we were talking, a college-aged guy walked past heading toward the bridge. I yelled at him, "Be careful, there's a naked guy by the river." He just said, "Oh, dang, I gotta cross that river," and kept walking. The next day, I reported it to the police, and an officer came out and checked the area. They didn't find any evidence, but they documented it just in case it happened again. To this day, I don't know what that was. Some people say homeless, mentally ill, or intoxicated. Others joke that it was a skinwalker. Honestly, after that night, I just know one thing. I will never go back to that spot alone again. And that's it for tonight's Chilling Adventures in the Wild, y'all. And this is why I will never go camping. Y'all stay sharp out there, trust your instincts, and until next time, stay anonymous.